Hello, welcome to the Nutmeg by the Evening Standard. I'm Dan Kilpatrick. I'm joined by Simon Collins, Jack Rosser and Malik Ouzia to talk over the weekend's football in the capital. We'll start with West Ham Arsenal, a cracking game at the London Stadium yesterday. 3-3, West Ham 3-0 up and squandered their lead to eventually draw. Jack, you were there for us. We're going to start by talking about loan signings because Jose Lingard was superb again, scoring West Ham's first goal and creating the second one. And Martin Odegaard, probably the key man in Arsenal's comeback, had a hand in all three of their goals. Simon, we'll start with you. I mean, can you remember any better January loan signings than these two?
I mean, it's difficult to think, particularly with Arsenal. The memories of January loan signings immediately made me think of Denis Suarez, who was probably most famous for walking through the mix zone carrying his suit each week, and Kim Kallstrom, who arrived with a bad back after playing beach volleyball. So the bar is pretty low at Arsenal, and Odegaard's probably the best January signing they've had. I mean, outside of that, I seem to remember Stephen Pienaar going back to Everton when he was struggling at Spurs and being brilliant. And Henrik Larsson was the other one I remembered, but I actually looked at those stats when Larsson was at Man United. And I think he played like sort of 3-4 games, but he was just so good in those games and quite key as they sort of made that title push. But they are a rarity to get a good January loan signing, simply because for them to adapt so quick is hard. But I think we've seen, given the financial constraints of the pandemic, how important loan signings are. And I think in Lingard and Odegaard, we've seen how teams in the last window could make their team better by not having to spend great sums of money, which was usually the solution for Premier League clubs.
Yeah, you wonder if it's the future of the transfer market, particularly for some of our clubs. I mean, Spurs, who we'll come on to later, had a loan signing score for them yesterday in Carlos Vinicius, and obviously Bale's back there as well. Jack, Jose Lingard was great again, and smashed in the opening goal, and then really clever assist for Jarrod Bowen to double West Ham's lead. Gareth Southgate was quite blunt when he was talking about Lingard's recall last week, and said he was very fortunate to be in there, and kind of suggested that injuries to the likes of James Maddison and Jack Grealish had opened the door for him. But it feels like he's really in there on merit. And I mean, what do you think he can bring to this England squad?
There's a lot he can bring. You sort of tend to agree with Southgate that, Lingard has been fantastic since he came in January. But like you say, if Grealish and Maddison were fit, then maybe they had a better case, because they've been doing it for longer across the season, where really it's just been a few games for Lingard so far. But he's really well thought of within the England camp. Southgate trusts him a lot. He was a key member, of course, of the side at the World Cup, and played well at the Nations League, which was his last cap, funnily enough, was in the Nations League finals in Portugal. But Southgate is someone that places a lot of value in the performances for England, not just their general form. Fabian Delph was quite a fixture of his England squads up to and around the World Cup. Jordan Pickford is his firm number one because he's never really made a mistake for England. So Lingard brings that. He brings that experience. Obviously, the form he's in is fantastic. He's really high on confidence, very good creatively, driving teams forward, which England are going to need if they're sticking with that back three, back five. They're going to need someone that can confidently carry the ball. And you speak even to a few West Ham players, they're all so happy to give him the ball in tight spots, because he has that sort of experience and confidence to just take it on and try and create something wherever he is on the pitch. So that experience and confidence will do a lot for England, you'd hope, and maybe something that once they're back fighting for those places, Grealish and Maddison maybe haven't quite got on Lingard.
Yeah, I wonder if goals is another thing that he'll bring to this England squad. I was looking over the list, and I think he's the fourth or fifth highest scorer in that squad already with 4 goals. So, he has scored goals for England before. That's something Southgate mentioned, and he's obviously in such a rich vein of form for West Ham in front of goal. He'll be licking his lips at the prospect of playing San Marino, obviously, on Thursday. But yeah, as you said, I think it's kind of thoroughly deserved in current form. Let's talk a little bit about Arsenal. Simon, from the ridiculous to the sublime yesterday, was that game kind of the story of their season so far?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of at the end of it was just left with a sense of feeling of what could have been for Arsenal, and that's the way the season's gone, really. You see them playing patches, well, certainly we see them playing runs of games where they look like a brilliant team and could beat anyone, and conversely, you look at them and you think they're an awful team. And yesterday against West Ham, they managed to condense that into a 90-minute period. I mean, the first half an hour, probably about the worst I think I've seen them play under Arteta. It's pretty close to it, if it isn't the worst. Half asleep. The second goal in particular, players not even looking at the ball. Louise and Mari, the relationship between them looked so they just met before kickoff in the car park. It was really, really bad. And then they go from that to looking, brilliant and so cohesive and such a threat. And for Arteta, it must be so infuriating to have that level of inconsistency, but have that level of inconsistency within the space of 90 minutes. It's not even a crossover game. So I think it just highlights how there's still a lot of work to go. And probably over this journey, certainly for the rest of this season, there's going to be lots of peaks and troughs. And just the hope for Arsenal is that the peaks are going to be better than the troughs.
Malik, Callum Chambers caught your eye at right back yesterday, didn't he?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of a strange one with him because he had become a bit of a fixture in the Arsenal team up to and around the point that Arteta took over, and then he had that really bad injury. And by the time he came back, there'd been new centre-backs have been brought in. Someone like Rob Holding had also come back from some injury problems. And I think people do still think of Chambers more as a centre-back, even though he's ended up playing all sorts of different positions, even in midfield when he went out on loan. But at right back now, there might be a bit of an opportunity for him. Hector Bellerin's form's not been great. He's been linked with a move away for a long time. And normally when you associate a centre-back with going to play at full-back, it's kind of, they're solid, they'll do a job, but you lose something going forward. But that was probably the best part of his game yesterday, the crosses. And I mean, there was one ridiculous pass in behind with the outside of the boot, I think, to get Lacazette in, that you sort of watch the replay again and you presumed it had been Odegaard or someone like that. But he sort of showed a side of his game that we haven't seen that much of before, and whether he can produce that week in, week out and kind of stake his claim to be properly Arsenal's first choice right back, I don't know. But there's a chance between now and the end of the season, I think, to give Mikel Arteta a bit of food for thought, particularly if someone like Bellerin is maybe going to be used to raise some funds in the summer if a PSG or whoever come in.
Jack, squandering 3 goals at home is never a good look, as Spurs will testify, particularly in the London derby. Obviously, Arsenal did to West Ham what West Ham did to Tottenham back in October. Very different context and times of the season, but for Spurs, that felt like a result that really scarred them and kind of halted their progress and completely changed their style of play. I mean, is this or was yesterday's result something to be concerned about in the long term for David Moyes, or do you think it was just, the unfortunate result of having a fairly thin squad at the business end of a very grueling season?
Yeah, it's difficult to tell. You mentioned the squad. They're obviously missing Angelo Ogbonna at the back, who's been so key to them. The way they played earlier in the season, they went 3-0 up, and yesterday, and Arsenal started putting a bit of pressure on. But you sort of think this is a position that West Ham are quite comfortable in. They'd be more than happy to ride the game out by just sitting deep, asking Arsenal to play around them, not play through them. But they just didn't have the same control, whether that was down to missing someone like Ogbonna or down to, I didn't think Declan Rice was at his best in that sort of position yesterday. He did well at the end driving forward, but you needed someone to take control of that sort of spot where Odegaard and Lacazette were dropping in and running things. So you tend to think the way they've progressed this season that it might just be a one-off. It's obviously going to be difficult for them. They've got to stew on it for a couple of weeks now. It's not like they've got rafts of people going out on international duty and away from the club. Some of the key players are, but not everyone. So it's something they've got to think over. But Jesse Lingard, going back to him again, you've got someone that has the mentality to ensure that doesn't scar them. Declan Rice has grown into someone like that. And obviously in Thomas Souček and Vladimir Coufal, you've got 2 players that have come from a smaller league in the Czech Republic, but have come from a club where they're constantly winning. So they have that mentality as well. So this will be the biggest sign, really, that of whether West Ham have moved on from the old West Ham mentality. If they come back fighting when they play Wolves on the Monday after the international break, then it'll be a good sign. So I don't think there'll be too many horrible concerns, but it's certainly something to take into account.
Just on Declan Rice there, I mean, I think it is a big couple of weeks coming up for him with England because the form he's been in for West Ham, I think a lot of fans and maybe Gareth Southgate as well are hoping that he can prove he can be kind of trusted to play on his own in that holding role, and then maybe you can fit an extra Phil Foden or Mason Mount or someone in the team as well as the attacking three. But I know, Jack, you were saying there, kind of concerned that when the tide did turn against West Ham yesterday, he couldn't stem the flow, and I know it's going to be lesser opposition over the next couple of weeks, but that'll be something I suppose that Southgate will be looking to see from him, probably particularly in the Poland game, who are the best team England are going to play potentially until the knockout stage of the Euros, really looking at the teams in England's group.
What I would say is that yes, with the England picture in it, yesterday was very much a one-off from Declan Rice. He has been fantastic this season, and he's normally so good in terms of reading the game and when he needs to cut in and cut the ball out. Yesterday it was, maybe it's a bit harsh to say he was poor, but by his standards, it wasn't what he can do, which I think says more for what he's capable of bringing to England.
Yeah, Southgate raised the possibility last week that Mason Mount could play in that deeper role next to Rice. So yeah, I agree. It could be a kind of big window coming up for those two, and that would open up the space for another attacking player, and in the front line, potentially Lingard could be a beneficiary there. Jack, do you think as it stands, West Ham have a strong enough squad to cope in the Europa League or even Champions League, or do you think they'd get completely wiped out by having to compete on two fronts next year with this squad?
This squad, they certainly couldn't compete. Speaking to people around the club, they're very aware of that. They know they need to give people like Thomas Souček and Declan Rice some support. They start every game, those two, and they cover so much ground in terms of their running. In other positions, they've got a bit of depth. You look at Ryan Fredericks, Ben Johnson in the fullback areas. They're fairly well covered there, but they could do with maybe just through the spine an extra centre-back, an extra midfielder and someone to support Mikel Antonio and put away the chances that maybe he can't quite manage. And of course, with his fitness always being a concern.
Let's move on to Spurs, who recovered from an historic humiliation in the Europa League at Dynamo Zagreb to beat Aston Villa 2-0 yesterday. Moved to within just 3 points of Chelsea in fourth place. So their season is very much alive, despite feeling like it's on the cusp of crisis. Mourinho made some big calls yesterday. There was no Harry Winks or Matt Doherty in the squad at all. Carlos Vinicius made only a second Premier League start and first start ever alongside Harry Kane, and Joe Rodon and Jeffrey Tanganga came into the back four. So Mourinho really reacting to that 3-0 defeat in Croatia. His changes paid off, and as I said, they relieved the pressure on the manager with a much needed 3 points. Simon, you were impressed by Lucas yesterday. I mean, I think he was comfortably the man of the match. I mean, he seems to be someone that kind of brings these fundamentals that Mourinho's always banging on about, honesty, commitment, hard work. I mean, he puts in a shift, basically, doesn't he?
Yeah, and he's I thought he was quite good against Arsenal in the North London derby, which obviously wasn't a great game for Tottenham. He's quite an un-Brazilian player, if that makes sense. But he's not what you'd really expect from a sort of South American flair player to be, dribbling, creating all these chances. But what he does, I think, he gives Mourinho a solid sort of 7. I think yesterday probably an 8 out of 10 performance that he can rely on. And I think when Spurs are going through difficult phases like they are now, Mourinho needs to be able to turn to players who he knows he's just going to get a solid performance out of. And I think Lucas provides that in a team that, hasn't had that stability. And, you could compare him to someone like Bale or maybe Dele Alli, who I think have those abilities to create those magic moments. But what they're going to get from Lucas right now is a solid base. And I think when the ship is, a bit rocky as it is at the moment, I think Mourinho's right to stick with someone like Lucas, and he's repaid his faith. And I think at the moment he's probably one of Spurs' best players and probably one of the first names on that team sheet for Mourinho right now.
Yeah, I think he's Tottenham's informed player. There's no doubt about that. I mean, the interesting thing for the rest of the season now for Spurs with being out of the Europa League is that Mourinho doesn't really have to rotate the squad anymore. He can stick with this kind of fundamentals 11, as I'm dubbing it, which is just the guys who are going to work hard and track back and put in a shift, basically. And that means we may have already seen the best of Bale this season. We might have already seen the best and the last of Dele Alli as well. because there's not a great deal of pressure to play those guys now. The interesting thing will be Rodon and Tanganga, whether they are kind of seen as medium to long-term solutions by Mourinho, or whether they were just a kind of shock tactic in response to Zagreb. Jack, what did you make of the introduction of the two young defenders for Spurs, and how, and what did you think the kind of issues were in Croatia? Because I know that was a game you were keeping your eye on.
Yeah, the game in the week is just. You remember a while ago that Mourinho came out and said that some of his players had the attitude that they were perhaps above the Europa League and didn't maybe want to be there. And, going there with a 2-goal lead, you maybe see, bits of that sort of the game going on, and Zagreb score and get another, and then they're maybe just sort of thinking, this can't actually happen to us. We'll be fine here. We'll pull something out of the bag, and then all of a sudden it's over. Which I think you look at the weekend and yesterday, and there were some scrappy moments earlier on, but they were playing with a fair bit of confidence towards the end, which probably makes midweek even more frustrating. With the two games put together. I think at the back, Tanganga, we've always known, is someone that Mourinho likes. They obviously vetoed him leaving the club in January. There were some inquiries to take him on loan, and then Southampton were one of them. Get the mention in. And then Rodon as well. He's made a few mistakes when he's been given the chance, but he's a player I like the look of. He was the best defender in the Championship last season, and there were plenty of clubs interested in taking him last summer. So I think he's someone that's worth a go, especially if Spurs now have got this clear run where it's not chopping and changing and you can afford to settle a back line. But I think the biggest question is, you mentioned that we might not see any more Gareth Bale, we might not see too much Dele Alli. Do you think just having a fundamentals 11, do you think they're actually good enough to put together the sort of challenge that Tottenham need if they're going to salvage anything from the Premier League season?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I was looking at Spurs fixtures this morning, and it's a relatively decent run-in they've got. They've got United at home shortly after the international break, and they've got Leicester away on the final day. But otherwise, that they will be looking at kind of all the games, really, and that there are tricky trips to Everton and Leeds, but still they'll be looking at all the games and thinking that they go into them as favourites or wanting to win. So you can't rule out Spurs for nicking fourth place, particularly if Chelsea tire and concentrate on the Champions League. But I just think that's my dog in agreement with my point. I just think Spurs are going to do the same as what they've done in most of the rest of the season, which is probably beat Newcastle comfortably after the international break, but then struggle against Manchester United in the following game. And then that's been the story of their campaign. They haven't had too much difficulty most of the time at kind of beating the clubs they should be. And the question is whether the fundamentals 11 can do it in the big games and kind of do what the more flair 11, including Bale, wasn't able to do against Arsenal, very notably recently. We mentioned Chelsea there, 2-0 winners over Sheffield United this weekend. We're not going to go into too much depth on that one. It was a kind of tired, functional win for Thomas Tuchel's side, I think. But we are going to talk about the Champions League. Chelsea drawn against Porto in the quarterfinals. City got Borussia Dortmund, Liverpool, Real Madrid, and then the other ties, probably the glamour one, Bayern Munich against Paris Saint-Germain. Malik, the English clubs have, it's a great quarterfinal draw. I think most people agree, but the English clubs have got to be fairly happy with their lot, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, Man City would like to think, I suppose, that they're probably playing as well as anyone in Europe, if not better than anyone in Europe at the moment. And we all know what this competition has meant to them in terms of trying to win it and what they've not been able to do in it over the last few years. And then on the other half of the draw, obviously Chelsea and Liverpool will be probably chuffed with the side of the draw that they're on. I think we'd all love to see a Chelsea-Liverpool semi-final for the kind of nostalgia stakes of the Mourinho Benitez era and all that kind of stuff. From a personal point of view, I've just got a bit of a sneaky suspicion about Liverpool, to be honest. It used to be a bit of a tradition, didn't there, of English clubs who were having a bit of a nightmare season in the league going really deep in the Champions League, and it feels like that's died away a little bit in recent years. But I think they're slowly showing some signs of returning to form, particularly in the European games where they were still decent, even when they were in the mire in the Premier League. And they can just kind of be fully focused on that. The whole Liverpool European narrative will kind of never go away, even if there aren't fans at Anfield. So I think some people were saying last week that, Chelsea will be pretty much favourites to get to the final now. And I'm not quite sure I see it like that, but I agree they have got a big chance.
Yeah, talking of narrative, the Jose Mourinho derby, Jack, Porto, Chelsea, Thomas Tuchel's side, should, as Malik says, should be looking at that, and then potentially Liverpool or Real as a decent route to the final, the way they're playing.
Yeah, the way that Tuchel's got them set up now completely changes how you look at them in the Champions League. I think when it is so, you need to be so solid and able to keep teams out and stop teams putting too many past you and putting the tie beyond you. It makes them, beyond City and Bayern Munich, who are the two obvious sides that you wouldn't want to be drawn against. It makes Chelsea probably in that top three now, because they are proving so difficult to break down. And while they've had a few struggles going forward, they're still formidable. They're unbeaten, of course, under Tuchel. So, like Malik said, you would fancy them. You'd be confident of getting to the final. It's just whether they've got enough to get past the likes of Man City or Bayern Munich, which I suppose the draw in the FA Cup will tell us a lot about as well.
And Simon, on to the Europa League. Arsenal drawn against Slavia Prague in the quarterfinal there. United have got Granada, and the other ties are Roma against Ajax and Spurs conquerors Dinamo Zagreb against Villarreal. A lot of people are already looking ahead to a potential meeting with Unai Emery in the semi-finals for Arsenal. But is that to count chickens too soon, do you think?
I think so. I think Slavia Prague are a better team than people probably give them credit for. I remember speaking to a few people at Leicester, because I went and covered the Arsenal-Leicester game the Sunday after they'd Slavia Prague just knocked out Leicester of the Europa League, and a lot of the Midlands reporters there were saying that this is a very decent Slavia Prague side, a lot better than people think it is. We've already talked about, Souček and Soufali both came from there. So they've obviously got a decent production line of players. So Arsenal need to be wary in that tie. I think it's a slightly better tie without fans. I think going to a packed, Prague stadium would have been interesting, I think. So I think Arsenal will be benefit from that. But the draw itself, I think, is a good one. I think the Granada was probably the team you'd want, but being kept away from Man United until the final, and having a reunion with Unai Emery in the semi-finals is about as good a narrative klaxon as you're probably going to get in this season. So it's all set up pretty well. And the fact that Spurs are out and they wouldn't have to play them in the semi-finals, Dinamo Zagreb instead, I think is also good for Arsenal. So it's a good draw overall, but certainly wouldn't be over or underestimating Slavia Prague.
Yeah, Spurs will be looking at that and wondering what if, but also perhaps relieved at not having to play a very stressful potential semi-final against Arsenal. We're going to finish with one question. Malik, I'm going to put it to you. It's from Ard Football on Twitter. He says, what's happened to Thomas Partey's form recently? He seems really leggy, especially toward the end of games. I felt Xhaka shouldn't have been taken off against West Ham and Partey should have instead. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose everyone was kind of asking questions about Thomas Partey shooting after the game yesterday, because he has been, it's a good job there's no fans in, because he would have done a few bits of damage this season, I think. But his form has dropped a little bit. Definitely at the end of that Spurs game. I mean, when you were looking for a bit of game management, you'd think a player who'd been playing under Simeone for the last 5 years would be just the man you turn to, but he was as guilty as anyone. Sloppy passes. He is a player who looks like when he's playing well, everything comes easy to him. He just sort of strokes the ball around. He never looks like he's, flat out sprinting, but he eats up a lot of ground. And it has started to look like hard work for him in the last few weeks. So yeah, maybe a little bit of a break. But then I suppose the flip side of that is, having had such a stop-start beginning to his Arsenal career. I'm sure Mikel Arteta is desperate to just get a run of games into him and kind of get some consistency going in that midfield. So, it's a little bit of a toss-up, but I agree. And I'm sure that now the Europa League is going to be such an obvious priority, he will get some rest in the league games, I'm sure.
Simon, any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think there is a slight benefit in that Partey is not going to be going with Ghana for the upcoming international break. He could have played in the home game for Ghana because Ghana's not a red list country, but they've got South Africa away, which is a red list country. So he'd only been able to play in one of the games. And I think both Ghana and Arsenal took the view that it's just better for him to stay at Colney for 2 weeks and get a bit of rest, do a bit of work with some of the guys that are there. So I think that is a big benefit because he looks a bit tired. And I think we're seeing now probably the issue he had by joining Arsenal on deadline day, which was October, not having a full pre-season. So a little 2-week break now, perhaps to get a mini pre-season will be very beneficial, I think.
Great. Yeah, I think that's true of a number of players across the Premier League. Well, that's all we've got time for this week. Thanks to Jack, thanks to Simon, thanks to Malik, and thank you for watching. We'll be back next Monday to talk about the internationals, with England, of course, playing 2 World Cup qualifiers before then. Until then, bye for now.